You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It's Friday, the 22nd of December, 2023, and you are listening to episode 44 of The Observing Eye, coming at you live from the computer hell cabin. If you're new, welcome aboard, and if you are returning, welcome back. As always, I like to begin these episodes with a brief moment of reflection, so let's take a moment to contemplate the good things that have happened this week. And now a moment for the not so good. As it's the 22nd of December, that means that Christmas is literally around the corner. So I thought it would be a fitting theme for this episode for us to explore Santa Claus in a little bit of psychological depth. Now don't panic, it's not going to get too crazy. We are going to be a little bit left field compared to our usual content. However, I want to talk about the personality archetypes of Santa Claus and what they represent from a cultural standpoint. So we all know Santa Claus, don't we? We've all heard of him. He's all slipped down our chimney at one point or another, stuffing something into our stockings. But what does he embody for us, culturally and psychologically? I thought if we look at archetypes, it would provide an effective window into how Santa Claus resonates with our cultural psyche. If you've never come across archetypes before, they were devised by Carl Jung, and they are a universally understood symbol or pattern of human behavior. And we find these patterns across all cultures and all time periods. The idea of an archetype is it taps into our collective unconsciousness, and Carl Jung was a big believer and a big advocate for the collective unconscious. And he believes that the archetypes represent fundamental human motifs of our experience as we evolve. So Santa Claus then, at first glance, just a large man in a red suit with a beard throwing presents with abandon from a flying sleigh. Yes, but there's much more beneath that red suit and white beard than meets the eye. I'm going to explore now some of those key archetypes that he represents and how they impact us and what resonates within us, and why Santa Claus is such a popular figure in our human mythology. So firstly, we have the caregiver. Now, Santa Claus is the utmost epitome of selflessness and caring. He's renowned for bestowing gifts upon good children and spreading joy, asking for nothing in return, aside from maybe a brandy and some biscuits when he slips down the chimney. This aligns wonderfully with Carl Jung's caregiver archetype, which is characterized by generosity, altruism, and a desire and care for others. In many ways, Santa Claus is the ultimate caregiver. He comes at us with unconditional positive regard, looking after the happiness of all of the world's children and what can be, he is like the symbolic father figure, which is why, in some cultures we refer to him as Father Christmas rather than Santa Claus. But with all archetypes, as Carl Jung describes, there are certain drawbacks, and I want to explore some of these drawbacks of the archetypes that I'm going to associate with Santa, because I'm hoping that this is going to give you a little window into these personality archetypes and maybe inspire you to go and do some research and reading of your own to understand the different types that are out there, and maybe to gain an idea of what archetype you may relate to, which in turn can give you a better understanding of your own motivations and your own behaviors. So the drawbacks of the caregiver archetype then. Now, caregivers, because they are so giving and so selfless, there is a potential for an unhealthy degree of self-sacrifice. Now, this comes about because the caregiver doesn't have appropriate boundaries in place to know when to stop caring. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but if we overgive and we overgive and we overgive, and then we have nothing left for us, it can become, this act of selflessness can become, to a degree, self-destructive. So there is a potential risk there of overgiving and burning out as a caregiver archetype. And this feeds into the next aspect, which is a neglect of their own needs and boundaries. So, as we said, burning out and potentially leading into something called martyrdom, which is where we sacrifice ourselves for the good of the other. There's also, of course, as a caregiver, the distinct potential to be taken advantage of, because not everyone in the world is as kind as Santa, and they will take advantage of people who are generous and selfless and giving. So that is something to be mindful of if you find yourself to be of the caregiver archetype. Watch out for those things. Don't give too much, don't self-sacrifice, and be aware, be mindful that there may be those out there who will take advantage of your good nature. The next archetype I want to talk about, and I feel is associated with Santa Claus, is the creator archetype. Now, of course, I think this is self-explanatory. What does Santa do all year when he's not busy delivering presents to children? Him and his little workshop of sweatshop elves are furiously making toys and gifts and presents. Now, the creator archetype, as described by Jung, represents the aspect of personality that is driven by the need, the urge to create, to innovate, and to express oneself. Now, this archetype, contrary to the name, is not limited to artists in the traditional sense, but includes anyone who feels a strong urge to produce something new and original. And that's across any field. That will be art, in science, in business, whatever comes up, any space in which a person exists, in which they have that desire to create, falls into the creator archetype. And when I say desire, it's a burning passion to build something new, to innovate through imagination. Let's look at some of those potential pitfalls of the creator archetype then. So, of course, and I'm sure any of you out there who have engaged in creative endeavors may feel this, perfectionism, the danger of perfectionism. The creator's pursuit of perfectionism can lead to dissatisfaction and frustration, especially if their notoriously high standards are not met. We have the fear of mediocrity. This underlying terror that we are not being innovative enough can lead to creative blocks. It can lead to procrastination. It can lead to a reluctance to share what we have created because we just don't think that it's good enough. And then we have a neglect of practical considerations. In their pursuit of creative expression, creators may sometimes overlook the practical impact of their work. They may become so enamored with the imagination that the real world function and utility of the thing they are creating can go to the wayside. The over delivery, there is no MVP with the creator. It is literally, for those of you not familiar with that acronym, that means minimum viable product, which is like, the least we have to do to get a product out the door that's actually going to do the job. So creators can become lost in the act of creation and end up not creating something or finishing something because they just become so involved in the process. So, the danger of not completing comes into play when we talk about the creator archetype. The next archetype I want to talk about, and which I feel is very much related to the image of Jolly Saint Nick, is the sage. Now, Santa is old, wise, seemingly immortal, seemingly all-knowing. He knows if you've been naughty or nice. And he reflects very much in this aspect the sage archetype. Now, the sage archetype, as described by Jung, represents the quest for truth, wisdom, and knowledge. And it's categorized by a deep desire to understand the world, to seek out information, and to share that information with others. It's not about just accumulating knowledge, it's about using that knowledge wisely. I mean, you could slap a toga on Santa and he'd be quite content, or he'd look quite the part in a meeting of Plato and Aristotle and all of those old Greek guys. He's got that vibe. He's got that philosopher vibe, Santa, apart from the flying sleigh and all that shit. Let's talk then, continuing our theme, let's talk a little bit about what are the pitfalls of the sage archetype. The first is over-intellectualizing. Now, sages can often become too caught up in their own thoughts and ideas, which leads to essentially analysis paralysis, where they struggle to take action because they're too caught up in thinking about the problem, in analyzing the problem. So over-analyzing it means that they don't actually do anything as a result to sort of take action or make something change. So that can be a danger of the sage archetype. There can be a certain detachment from reality within this archetype. And what I mean by that is that in their pursuit of knowledge and wisdom, sages can become detached from the practical realities of everyday life or from the emotional aspects of the human experience. There is a very significant overindulgence of the rational and a diminishing of the emotional, because the rational is how they think, it's how they interpret the world. So they may not necessarily look upon things with the same emotional or empathic viewpoint that others would. And this can lead to misunderstandings and miscommunications between the sage archetype and other archetypes, particularly more emotional based ones. And then we have, this may not be considered a negative by the sage archetype, but it certainly is by me. There is a danger of being perceived as being aloof or arrogant when one falls into this particular archetype. The quest for knowledge and the tendency to question everything can sometimes make them appear arrogant. And there's also the importance that sages place on certain things. So as I just said about that detachment from reality, from looking at the practical and emotional aspects of the human experience, they may not place as much weight on the importance of that. Whereas generally, most people find the human experience to be quite at the forefront of their minds, quite an important part of their lives. So sages can seem quite aloof because they just sort of look down upon that with a certain level of hubris. So that is my final danger that I will mention on the sage archetype. And finally, there is one more archetype which I feel is very much associated with Santa Claus, and that is the archetype of the magician. Santa's ability to fly around the entire world in one night, to stuff himself down chimneys, to ride around with magical reindeers. All of this very heavily points towards the magician archetype. Now, Jung describes the magician archetype as a symbol of transformation and power, and the capacity to turn ideas into reality. This particular archetype is associated with insight, with mystery, and the harnessing of universal laws and energy. Magicians are seen as individuals who can bring about change through their understanding of the deeper laws of nature or the universe. Now, that to me, of all the other archetypes, I feel that the two most prominent ones are the caregiver and the magician for Santa. But of course, I had to put some filler in, and it's nice to talk about the other ones as well. Now, let's go and discuss a little bit around the challenges that may be presented to the magician archetype. I'm just sitting here thinking, I don't actually know if I can think of anybody that I know personally who falls into the magician archetype. They must be quite a rare one. That's something I'll have to go and find out and add to the comments later on. So the challenges of the magician archetype then. So firstly, manipulation. Not that they were being manipulated, but with their understanding of how the world works, how everything works, there is a risk that magicians might use their knowledge for manipulation or for personal gain at the expense of others. So quite contrary to the idea of the caregiver that we talked about earlier. There is isolation, the potential for isolation. Because of their unique abilities and understanding, magicians can sometimes find themselves in a sense of separation or isolation from others who may not comprehend their vision or methods. And lastly, the ever-present danger of hubris. The power that comes with the magician archetype can lead to, fundamentally, a God complex, where the individual feels omnipotent or above ordinary moral considerations. A lot to consider then, if we find ourselves in the magician archetype. It feels like there needs to be some sort of ethical temperance to it, because the significant danger of falling into a bit of a wormhole there via manipulation and omnipotence. It's never a good combo in my book. What is it then about these archetypes, about these behavioral characteristics of Santa Claus that resonate with us? So the caregiver aspect taps into our desire for nurturing and protection. The creator speaks to our innate urge to build and innovate. The sage appeals to our quest for wisdom. And the magician captivates our imagination and belief in the miraculous. Understanding these archetypes in cultural figures like Santa Claus helps us to understand ourselves. They mirror our values, our fears, our aspirations, and our conflicts. In a way, the stories that we tell about Santa Claus and other figures, other cultural mythological figures that we have, they are stories that we tell about the human experience. And what we must remember is that while Santa Claus is a mythical figure, sorry, kids, massive spoiler alert, I should have put that at the beginning. While Santa Claus is a mythical figure, the qualities that he embodies are very real and very present in each of us. The capacity to care, create, enlighten, and transform. These are gifts we all possess. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson that Santa offers us. The reminder of our potential to embody these positive aspects of human nature. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say on the personality archetypes of Santa Claus. As always, thank you for joining me today. I deeply appreciate all of you who spend your time here and hope that there is something that comes out of it that you find useful and interesting and can take out into the world with you. As always, if there's anything you'd like to comment on or discuss about the contents of this particular episode or any of the previous episodes that I've put out there into the ether, you can do that in a number of different ways. Firstly, we have our Substack, which is the home of this podcast, and you can find that at theobservingeye.substack.com. We're also out there on the YouTube, which is youtube.com/@theobservingeye. And you'll find us on Instagram and Twitter with the handle @theobservingeye. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'm keen to understand your thoughts and ideas on anything that I may have discussed in this episode. Next week, there will be a podcast going out, but it will not be a recording of me in this format. I'm going to be dragging something out that I put together a few years ago. It was an interview with someone that I think just might be useful and interesting for you, and it keeps us going over Christmas. So keep your ears out for that next Friday. And lastly, as is Christmas, I'd like to wish you all a fantastic holiday. I genuinely hope that you've all got some time away from work, some time to recharge, and are able to spend that time with loved ones. I hope that Santa stuffs your stocking with something good, and I will see you all in the new year. Much love, everybody. Merry Christmas, and I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope that you found it useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writings or work around psychology and philosophy and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com, and that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll see you soon.